David, a 35-year-old engineer, had achieved great success in his career but had failed in his personal life. He was a key software developer at a technology research company focused on developing a time machine. He was seen as a talented individual, and his colleagues admired his abilities. However, behind this success was a life full of loneliness and unescapable sorrow. David once had a dreamlike life. He had a girlfriend named Natalie, a vibrant young woman. They first met at university while studying engineering. Natalie was an art student. Despite their opposite lives, they got along remarkably well. Their relationship was filled with happiness and hopes for the future until everything changed one day. When David began working at the technology research company, his dedication to work made him neglect Natalie. The stress from developing the time machine caused him to become irritable and unintentionally take it out on her. They gradually grew distant until Natalie eventually left him, leaving a void in David's heart. Shortly after, Natalie was involved in a car accident and died. David's guilt intensified. He thought that if he hadn't neglected her or if he could go back in time to change everything, the story might not have ended this way. The ensuing grief led David into a state of depression. He could no longer live normally. Although he continued working at the company, he felt that his life was worthless. Every time he saw the time machine, which he had once been proud of creating, it became a tool that constantly made him question, if time travel were possible, what would I change? One day, while working in the lab, David had the idea to use the time machine to go back and fix his past. This idea was too powerful for him to resist. He decided to travel back to the time when he was first facing work-related stress and neglecting Natalie, hoping to correct his past mistakes. David activated the time machine and set it to travel back to the day when he and Natalie started having problems in their relationship. This journey might change his life, but he was unprepared for what he was about to face. When David arrived in the past, he encountered his younger self, full of ambition and confidence. The 29-year-old David was unaware of how the mistakes about to unfold would lead to immense regret. David from the present closely observed his past self's life. He saw himself working hard and pushing forward, neglecting his relationship with Natalie. He saw the stress that his past self was hiding, which at the time, he hadn't realized was slowly destroying his happiness. At that moment, David from the present decided to confront his past self. He appeared before the younger David, who was shocked and confused. "Who are you?" the 29-year-old David asked. David from the present looked at his past self with a firm gaze, knowing how crucial this confrontation was. "I am you from the future." After explaining everything about time travel, the past David remained confused. He didn't understand why his future self had come back to talk to him. "What do you want?" he asked. David from the present paused for a moment, unsure of how to answer. He had once thought he wanted to fix the past to escape his suffering, but facing his past self made that thought unclear. "I just want you to know that some things cannot be fixed," David from the present said with a tone full of regret. "I tried to escape from the mistakes I made, but the truth is those mistakes made us who we are today." David from the past listened in confusion. He was still angry that his future self was telling him to accept failure instead of trying to fix it. "You mean I have to let everything fall apart?" "Yes," David from the present spoke softly. "Sometimes pain is part of growth. If you kill me now, it won't change anything in the future because eventually, you will have to face it anyway." The conversation between the two Davids made David from the present start to realize that, regardless of whether he could fix the past, accepting his current self was the most important thing. He couldn't escape being who he was. But as David from the present prepared to return to the future, he found himself trapped in an endless loop. Every time he tried to change the past, the result always confirmed that he would repeat the same actions over and over. David from the present struggled to return to his own world, but the more he tried to free himself from the cycle binding his life, the heavier his memories and guilt became. Every time he went back in time to attempt a change, he found himself back at the original starting point. One day, while still stuck in the journey, the overlap of different time periods made him notice that something had changed. Natalie from the past seemed to sense a change in David. She began to notice his inner conflict and gently asked, "David, are you okay?" For the first time, David felt that Natalie was not just a lost lover but someone willing to stand by him even in difficult times. David from the present began to realize that what he needed was not to fix the past but to accept his mistakes and learn to forgive himself. As David watched Natalie from the past, he decided that this time he would not try to change the past. Instead, he would do something he had never done before. Speak honestly with Natalie. He told her that he felt sorry for not valuing her and shared all his regrets about the future. Natalie listened attentively and said, "I never wanted you to be perfect. I just wanted you to be yourself." David felt a relief he had never experienced before. The chain of guilt that had bound him started to loosen. This moment made him realize that traveling back in time was not as important as forgiving himself. When David returned to the present world, he found that his life might not have changed in the way he had hoped, but the way he viewed himself and the past had changed forever. He accepted that the mistakes of the past were not what destroyed him but were lessons that helped him grow. He began a new life filled with understanding and self-forgiveness. When David returned to the present world after the conversation with Natalie from the past, he felt as though his life was returning to normal. He was ready to accept and forgive himself. He turned off the time machine and resolved not to use it anymore. But what he hadn't expected happened. As David returned to a normal life, the things around him began to change strangely. People he knew started to forget him. His name disappeared from company records. Everything that had been associated with him was erased. David began to notice that he himself was slowly fading away. He looked at his hand, which was becoming transparent, as if he was about to disappear. Then David realized the harsh truth. By going back in time and confronting his past self, he had erased his identity from that timeline. The slight changes he made in the past meant he had never become a person with regrets, and without regrets, he had never traveled back in time. As a result, David was erased from all history. He never existed in this world. And this confrontation with the past not only made him accept himself but also made him disappear from existence. In the final moment, before he vanished completely, David smiled with calmness because he knew that even though no one would remember him, he had learned to accept himself. And finally, he had let go of the regrets that had once consumed his life, leaving only the abandoned time machine in the lab, its purpose unknown to anyone.